So, Cedric, welcome to the fireside chat.
Thank you, Vishal. Very nice to meet you, and thank you for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome, awesome. So, I think why don't we start with the with an introduction?
Sure.
So, I think I was reading it, but I'm sure I would butcher it if I go up explaining your decorated experience. So maybe why don't you walk us through your journey, what, and then we can start with the discussions.
Sure. Happy to. So, Cedric Cook here. Pleased to meet you all. I am a Marine Corps, active duty Marine Corps veteran of 6.5 years. I had approximately three military occupations, administration, marksmanship instruction, and then I acquired the skill of a information systems analyst working in the units in my last duty station. I'm currently an IBM executive. I've been with IBM for the last 23 years. I spent a couple of years in there with Dell. I noticed also, Vishal, that you and I have some commonality in that. But at the core of who I am, not only am I an executive, but I'm also an entrepreneur, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences with you all, premised on transitioning from the military and the skills that I've acquired there into now the civilian world.
That's beautifully put. So I think what I'm planning, Cedric, so we'll do this conversation in maybe three chunks. So one is your before uh, your veteran time, during the veterans era, and then after maybe the transition. We'll talk about transition and then IBM, and then trying to create connect these kind of issues with real like anyone who's listening and maybe viewing it now or later, they can connect with um, their experience and expertise and journey with yours and see whatever tidbits they can extract from it and hopefully make their life a little bit better from your journey. So does it sound okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm educated through for first off, my father was in the military. He was in the Army. So it was through his service that I learned about, the power of service, I would say. He was in the Army. He retired after 20 plus years of service. He was also a Desert Storm veteran. It was during that time when I was in high school and I served in the ROTC program and I also joined the Army Reserve. And that was premised off of my curiosity, and learning what service really meant. In the military, starting there in the Army Reserve, I learned that it was about developing leadership skills, helping others, serving in the community, which is also a foundation of what ROTC, Reserve Officer Training, taught me there. Um, and then just developing skills. My first job prior to active duty was really construction equipment repair person. It was just fascinating for me, the heavy equipment that they had in the military and the Army Reserve and how they were able to deploy those assets, to support operations like in, other countries in South America. And, although I didn't actively deploy at that time, I was a part of the unit and we were preparing the equipment on the weekends as I drilled to be able to go and be ready for deployment. So I learned quite a bit there, doing maintenance and things like that within the unit. And then, like I said, prior to going into the active military, I went to university. I started out at Jackson State University in Mississippi. And there I was able to receive an ROTC scholarship. And that's where I started to also, continue on with some of the service there and learning about what service really meant, maintaining the physical, conditioning there on the university campus. But I realized something during that time that I hope that, most of our children and people that are learning would also take to heart is that without having a good regimen of discipline, and being able to focus, it's kind of difficult to really hone in and get the maximum of what your potential was. So, I left university prior to completing my undergraduate degree, and I had a decision fork there in the road to make. Again, my father coming from Desert Storm and, learning about his experiences there, he was very bullish that I should continue with university, but I was very bullish in that my discipline wasn't up to a certain standard in order to stay focused on getting education that I had signed up for. So I decided then that if I wasn't going back to university, that I had to do something, that was out of reach for the most people. And during my high school tenure, the Marine recruiter would come around periodically and talk to us about what the Marine Corps is about, being an elite fighting force and wearing those dress blues. And that's when I thought about it. I was like, well, I think that's my calling. If I'm not going back to the four-year university to complete that training and education, then I may as well do something that's, out of reach for most, and that would hopefully, show that I'm disciplined enough and I will be able to develop my discipline and those leadership attributes in order to become someone, of higher stature that people looked up to. So I joined the Marine Corps. I went to boot camp in Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. For those of you that are familiar with that environment, if you're not yelling louder than the planes that are going over you during your training, you're not doing something right. So you might want to hit the dirt. And we all learned together, developed together, and completed that training. It was rigorous, but I remember one thing that my uncle told me, who was also a Marine, was that no matter what you're going through in that training, I always maintain a sense of humor, and I always remember that you can overcome this task by just persevering and doing the work that's in front of you. And that's exactly what I did. I leaned into it. I stayed focused. I became the guide. I got fired, became a squad leader, continued to persevere through that training. And I was then into my military career in active duty. From that point, I think the second evolution was about, what did I learn while I was in the Marine Corps? Going on deployments like to Okinawa and Korea, I learned that, it's about engaging others when you don't understand something, learning the culture, being able to learn the job. I was in Third Marine Corps, Third Marine Division, and that's where the ground pounders are. For those Marines on the call, every Marine is a marksman, but not every Marine is a grunt. Even though I was the administrator, I was out there in the field with the infantry folks, doing the grind and setting up and patrolling and, making sure that, we were able to, put ourselves in a proper fighting posture. So through that, I just learned that no matter what your job is, always be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the hard work, because doing the hard work will teach you many things that you could never get from just sitting back and observing and letting others get into, the heart of what was going on. So that's when I, figured out that this thing called technology was super important because I was in the G3 shop, which is on the general staff. We were responsible for setting up and operating the battle environment for those people that were, forward deployed and going out in the field. We set the operations center up, and I learned how to run cables and connect laptops and connect other, instruments for technology's sake to be able to track and understand what was going on in that environment. And I was so fascinated by this particular device that was sitting in our G6 operation, which is more the technology shop. And I was fascinated because I was looking at this phone and talking back to the people in Okinawa. And I was able to actually see them visually on the other end of the phone. So I was like, man, this is some real stuff. Like, this is next level. How can I be on a phone and talk to somebody and see them in another part of the world or country? So it was that point where I was just fascinated with technology and I wanted to learn more. The curiosity is something that I believe that everyone should maintain if you want to learn and understand new things and different things. So from there, I redeployed back to Okinawa and then essentially redeployed back to the States after that. and I was stationed in a unit that was supporting reservists throughout the world and throughout the U.S. And we needed someone on site that understood how to connect devices, technology-wise, computers, phones, laptops, other types of devices. And I raised my hand. I volunteered because I saw it as an opportunity to learn and explore more into the depths of what technology meant. I started learning the terminology. I started understanding what programming was about, even though as a kid I had, a nice computer that my stepfather bought for us. And, I started to learn how to program there. So it just continued to feed on that curiosity about technology and how to use it and what it meant, in terms of the programs that we were developing at that time. So back to the story is, I completed my time in the Marine Corps. I decided that I needed to go back to college to get my degree. I went to the University of Phoenix and continued and pursued my undergraduate. And then from there, I was still curious, and lo and behold, I got jobs. I worked at Shell. I worked at the Marine Corps Reserve Network Operations Center there, and just in the field, learning more, being able to put my hands on the technology, and then being able to show others and mentor others in how the technology worked. So from there, I got the call for IBM. They were asking me about a role in testing, and I was like very curious about it. So I grabbed a book to get my understanding in place. Because the certifications, no matter how hard you study, there's only so much you can learn from the education and the books. But when you put your hands on the technology, then you start to, gain more insight about the possibility, the art of the possible. And that's where I was like, if I'm going to, take this role at IBM in Raleigh, then I would definitely get something out of it other than being able to transition, my family to another location and experience new things. So I took the opportunity and I hired into IBM as a test engineer. And my IBM career just continued to grow through that curiosity, through putting my hands on the technology, being known for something. That's one of the things that I also think is super important because, we as military people, we're multifaceted, individuals. We are jack of all trade, but a master of none in many cases. But, I urge anybody that I talk to and mentor to always figure out what is it that you want to be known for and ensure that people recognize you for that skill or that trait and that contribution. So through that experience, I was testing in the lab, became known with the marketing and the engineering folks who were designing the products, for building and making new creative things. And that's where my innovation gene started to kick in. And I moved over to a development role, developing products, IO interface cards, working with partners in different parts of the business. And that's where I continued to grow and develop there. So I think I bored you enough with my story. Um, I think if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer
So no,
them.
I think firstly, thank you so much, and thank you for your family. I think I'm so blessed to have you on the call, and it's always fascinating to see that how a family is empowering the next generation to take on the same challenges as they did. So I think I'm curious to learn what are some of the qualities and traits that your parents and your uncles, like whoever is in serving in active duty, um, uh, provided you that actually helped you be what you are today?
For sure, for sure. Growing up as a young kid, not really having a lot of resources, with my mom, she always taught me to be resourceful. And that kind of stimulated the entrepreneurial gene in that I was out selling shoes using this catalog by a company called Stewart McGuire to make money, right? And that money was to be saved and used for things that I needed. Not that I was required to go out and make money to help my mom provide for us, but it just added an extra layer of support. And I was also very grateful in being able to see the benefits and the fruit of my labor. So that stimulated the entrepreneurial gene. Another thing that I think was super important, and I absolutely learned this from my father and my brothers and every one of us, carry this gene forward, is just being accountable. Being accountable for the things that you're responsible for and owning it, no matter whether it's success or it's a failure, and recognizing the difference between those two things, what is considered success and what is not. So that was one of those other, things that I learned from my father, is just being accountable and responsible. And then, just being able to help others, being empathetic to others' needs and being able to help others when you can. So.
Interesting. And one question I hear a lot about military family is this junction of whether to serve or to get educated. So which one to prioritize first and which one to next? And I think almost every parent, they struggle through that decision. So I'm curious, as a kid, like, so what would you suggest to people in the group chat right now, who are either that military family navigating that confusion, or are one of the ones who are has to decide whether I should serve or get educated first? What would you suggest to those guys?
Yeah, I think there's no right or wrong answer there. I think for me, service came before education to some extent, but then there was also the education that allowed me to understand what service was, right?
Mm,
So in terms of service, I felt like, being able to serve helped me financially, because I didn't come from a family of those that had, lots of resources in order to pay for the education. My father didn't, go to college. He went from high school directly into the Army. And, so college to my family before I went was something that was there, but not necessarily viewed as attainable. And that's why, as I continued to learn from others, what it meant to go to college and then to eventually, become a commissioned officer, that was something that was viewed as highly esteemed. So I guess to your point, Vishal, it's more of, if you want to really get to the crux of who you are, then I think service is probably a very good route. And it
mm,
also enables you to pay for fun education if you do it if you do it right through the military path. But if you desire to get educated, you can do both. Whilst going to college, you can also, go to ROTC program and also serve there. Service is not just one thing either.
mm,
Service could also mean, volunteering in your community. That's just a sign of that unselfish nature of going
mm.
out helping someone in need. So I could argue both sides of the coin, but for me and how I got there, I think I did education, service, and then service, education again, and then more service, while actually being educated. So I would urge anyone to always consider service, but also become educated so that you can help others to grow and develop their path.
Interesting, and thank you for putting that. I think one of the very interesting thought that I was talking to one of the military family, and he's a good mentor to us as well. So he talked about how the best day um, to start transitioning into the civilian life is the first day you join army. So it was like a pretty weird. So I had this discussion of that we hear a lot about people struggling to transition over to public life, and basically how, and they said, no, you have to start navigating your military career as transitioning over. So I'm curious, what's your take as you're going through USMC, or your personal journey through that how, if anyone who's watching this feed, they are currently active duty and working and serving, how can they what can they do now, so when they transition over, they have a little bit better experience than most of people who had a not so fun time in transitioning over.
Yeah, Vishal, I think you're exercising my why. If you ask me why am I here, I'm here because I have a story to tell about, my experience in transitioning, right? I'll be honest, my experience when I transitioned from the active duty Marine Corps into the civilian world wasn't as pleasant as I wanted it to be, as I thought it should be. And it was more so about my feelings about how things should work or could work. In the military, in Marine Corps specifically, there's a thing called esprit de corps, and there's also this thing called trust. So in the civilian world, I felt, and this is only my feeling as I came out of the military, was that it was difficult to know, the one mission that everyone was going after and believe that everyone was truly going after that one mission, one goal, right? Um, because often, I would find colleagues that would kind of go and do their own thing, but it was more self-serving versus serving the good of the team. And that thing that I learned in the Marine Corps was that if the team doesn't win, nobody wins. Everybody must hit the dirt. And when I say hit the dirt, those that have been in the Marine Corps understand absolutely, what I mean. But it's really just, doing calisthenics in the dirt because someone said, you messed up and you need to get down and give me some push-ups or sit-ups or run, whatever that case is. So the point is, I felt like coming out of the military and into the civilian world was a challenge for me because, there was a little bit of, disparity in what the mission was and lack of clarity in a lot of cases. But I think in all of that, I did eventually learn that as a leader and as a, bona fide leader, I could absolutely set the direction if I get the right, communication going and the right networking going with others who are responsible for the overall mission. And it's no different than being in the military, right? If your, company commander or your battalion commander says this is what we're about and this is how we're going to do things, and you as a secondary, lower level leader in the organization, you understand that and you study it, then you can absolutely make a contribution to get there to the big mission. And that's what I learned, through development in the civilian world. But I also knew it inherently while being in the military that that's the way things work. So I had to kind of marry the two understandings before I could really ingrain it, imbue it, and then execute it in the way that it should have been. So it took a while, though, for me, honestly, to be able to understand that concept and marry that concept with how the civilian society could work. And it also took a little bit of faith on my part, to
Mm.
believe that my teammates were really doing the things that were in the best interest, or at a minimum, coaching them towards, look, I understand you want to be, the superstar and shiner, for this particular mission, but I would ask if we could come together and align ourselves on a common objective. And that takes a little bit of finesse at times. It takes a little bit of finesse. It takes a little bit of patience. In the military, a lot of the things that we were doing wasn't about take your time and, sweetheart time and do it. It was about, it's not, is it done yet? We understood the mission, so is it done yet? So it took a little bit of patience on my part to understand that some people don't move that way because they weren't indoctrinated in that way about how to, mission first and how to get there. So it took a little bit of soul searching for me to say, be patient with these people, help them, bring them together for understanding of the common objective. And then as we move, and move expeditiously to get the job done. So that's all I'm saying is that, it takes a little bit of time. I'm sure that for those who are transitioning and those who recently transitioned, you'll get there. Just be a little bit patient with yourself, give the people around you a little bit more grace than what you may have been used to, and then try to move forward in accomplishing the goal. Because if the team wins, we all win.
Beautifully put. I think so. Couldn't agree more. And the other thing we hear a lot about is the role of a mentor. So many of the success stories that we have heard, it is many times it is attached to someone who came right at the right time and offered that small nudge of I think advice or grace or whatever that keep the ship afloat. And I think you put up really well that it's a team effort at the end of the day. So what has been your journey? I'm curious when it comes to, were you able to find a mentor or guide or that has helped you in transition through, and any advice for the one listening, that what can they get out of this?
Yeah, sure. And I'll say that that is one of the most frequently asked questions that I get from people that are in the transitional state or are in the military is, how do I find a mentor?
Mm,
True to form, you may have a mentor that you don't already classify as a mentor. It could be that wise individual that's always pulling you to the side and dropping nuggets of information about how to do things or what you should do or how to conduct business or how to conduct yourselves in certain environments. That's what a mentor is to me, and that's what I try to be to my mentees, is that wise voice that gives them a little bit of insight, but not necessarily does the whole task for them. Just share my out, what I think is a reasonable expectation for how things should work or how the outcome should look. Those are things that I think that mentors do and can do and should do. But look around you. Look around you first to see who's that wise voice and who's that person who's dropping gems on you of information around, look, hey, if you want to achieve A, B, and C, this is what I did. Or hey, if you want to achieve A, B, and C, have you considered?
mm.
That's what good mentors do. They don't always provide the answer. They steer you and give you insight and give you at least some contextual insight around where to go and how to go. In today's world, the mentors of today are changing just a slight bit, in that using tools like Chat GPT or using Claude, you can get insight from information. The language may not be considered mentor-ish to you, but I'll be honest, we all could use that extra, pound of insight or thinking to help us to formulate what we would call the reasonable outcome that we want. Try that as a prompt in Claude or Chat GPT and see where that lands you.
That's a great piece of advice, I think, and we also talk to a lot of kids who are going through that, that never underestimate the power of whatever small nudge you can get. And sometimes, so I think emotional aspects I would not, but I think ChatGPT has its own plus and minuses. Everything is a great idea unless you question it. So I think it's just, but I absolutely agree with you. I think that's a wonderful piece of advice. The other thing I'm curious to have your opinion on is, so basically we heard a lot about the importance of education. Okay, so I think this bachelor's or master's, they're super expensive. They're not something, I think, and you shed some light on it, that joining a service sometime helps, because you can now sponsor these kind of educations. So having that lens today, if you look at the scenario today where you have ChatGPT, Claude, that pretty much can give you any piece of knowledge that you ever seek about any topic that you ever imagined, almost at a free price. So, what's your take on the importance of getting this bachelor's, or getting this education, like detour of 2 years, 4 years, 3 years of rigorous curriculums to get to a? Do you think is it a good part of the strategy? I'm curious.
Yeah, yeah, Vishal, I mean, you're right. I think there are multiple ways to achieve the outcome that you want, for your life and for your career path. Um, some people go and get the 4-year degree, some people get the 2-year degree, some people go to college just for the experience. Some people, decide they want to get the PhD, right? There's no right or wrong path for this. I think where technology has landed us today leaves us in a pretty, interesting conundrum in terms of formal education versus hands-on experience, on the job training, that is. I firmly believe that on the job training is absolutely necessary and important, no matter if you have the degree paper or not. Um, for me, my first order was to, out of high school was to go to college, but I realized very quickly, experience-wise, I was having a great time. But from an educational perspective, I just didn't have the discipline in order to get the material and show that I've proved that I've comprehended it on the test and et cetera. So my path was then to go and get some more hands-on. in the Marine Corps around my job skills training. And also, I think, just listening to those mentors is also another point of on the job training. Because, like, when I was thinking that the textbook told me to do things one way, but the mentor said, wait a minute, have you considered? That also changed the dynamic a bit. So, net is there's no right or wrong way to do it today. If you're going to go the non traditional route of going to university, absolutely prove through certifications, which is something that I also did, that you have mastered something. Because having a mastery and proving it is also a super important aspect of how do you get the job, because that's what we all essentially want to do is get the job and then let the job transition into a career, no matter which path you take. So that's also an important attribute is those certifications, on the job training, and then if you choose going and getting a formalized education to prove it as well.
Interesting. And one more thing, I think you put up really better best is the raise your hand, right? You raise your hands, and I think and people who raise your hand, they pretty much get in this situation a lot about volunteering. So they raise their. So I'm curious, what is your um, point of view on volunteering is because I think and this is specific to me. I think I tell a lot to the kids that the best way to get somewhere is just volunteer, and then you never know what you will end up in because people don't know that and suddenly the emotional connectivity and then trust and then everything is a cakewalk. So I'm curious, like, what has been your journey? Do you resonate with that idea? And I'm curious, like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think in the military, a lot of people, a lot of veterans, active duty or otherwise, have said, well, be careful, don't volunteer, or if you are volunteer, be voluntold, which is another, analysis analogy of how do you, get there to get the job done. Well, so in the civilian world, one of the key things to remember is whilst you are operating as a team, being able to differentiate your skill set is super important.
Mm,
That could mean the difference between you getting the big job or the job next job, right? Is being differentiated in your capabilities or in your skills. Now I mean, as an individual, that may be a little difficult to understand, but think about it within
mm,
the branches of service, you have the Army, you have the Air Force, you have the Marine Corps. We're not going to start a fight here, but I'll
mm,
say this, that each one of those fighting forces are known and have a specialty area that they
mm,
can absolutely demonstrate without question in war or peace times. So if you think about it in that context, the Marines are good for ground force as well as air, land, and sea, right? Some would say that they're not as good in the sea because the Navy are the carriers for that. But being differentiated in what you know and what you can do is an important aspect of development for you for your career. So if it's public speaking, then great. That's a differentiated skill for you. Be the best at it. If it's being able to, develop a program using software, C sharp or C plus rather, or C plus plus rather, then do that and try to be really good at that. I think that's also an important attribute. So back to the volunteerism, sometimes in order to get those skills, it requires you to step forward and do the hard work. Never shy away from a good fight, as one of my mentors used to tell me. You know, it may be difficult at first, but as you get into it and you
mm.
understand it and you study it and you work hard to be successful, that's exactly what you're going to get out of it is a success factor. So think
Interesting.
about it in that context.
Awesome. And I think you shared a lot about, so you shared a point of view about coding that pick up a book and learn to code. So I think the next session is about veterans who code. So I'm curious how in today's time, how important it is to code or a veterans to learn to code.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I think the concept of software programming or development or coding, as you once you understand the concept, then you can train on any area of it. I think that software development has taken a turn as pertains to technology, where you actually have software that does software development. IBM has a tool referred to as Bob. If you want to go to the IBM.com site, and it's intended to use software as a method for actually doing software development. Now, one might ask, can you really trust it? I think humans are always going to be required in that. I was listening to a podcast earlier that was done internal to IBM about, what's the best way to use a software development tool like Bob in order to develop code, and it's to have a specification. The specification comes from your requirements, and you as the programmer should understand, what the specifications are, because you don't want to get into a situation where now you have a blob of software with several lines that you don't understand and you can't debug it if something should go wrong. And you can't validate whether it's trusted or not if you don't understand what the intent was on that those lines of code. So I think that's super important, is first to learn and understand the concept, and then to understand ways of which you would then produce software development using tools, modern tools that also are built on the foundation of generative AI.
Interesting. And now let's pivot to the IBM and your journey in IBM. So
Mhm.
IBM is one of the leading companies when it comes to on the technology side, whether it's come to IBM side, AI side, quantum computing side. How like what was your secret of success to finding your way to IBM? Like, what is something that you could sort of translate to the other listeners and viewers that they can
Sure.
do to find themselves in this high tech leading technology companies? And I think you learned everything your way. Like you didn't have never had a background in coding as such. Like you just volunteered yourself to do it. So I'm curious, like what you could suggest to the listeners and viewers?
Yeah, for sure. To work for a company like IBM is absolutely an honor. 115-year-old company that's continued to transform and grow and change, as the market needs are changing. If you take that understanding and you think about who you are as a person, you know, that's willing to adapt to new situations and adjust and change and learn, all of those things make it possible for me to remain as I am at IBM. Through my IBM career, I've had several jobs, whether it's project management, program management, working in the labs, doing software development, working in the labs, debugging hardware issues, or whatever the case has been. That's been some of those journeys that I've gone through in order to become the executive that I am now. I'm very grateful for that, and grateful for the people that took the time to work elbow to elbow with me and teaching me things that I didn't understand. And I'm just excited for the future because yes, IBM, being a 115-year-old company is on the edge of what's next, right? And that's the thing that I appreciate most, is about how we're going and taking on the challenge of quantum. We're not doing it in a vacuum. Trust me on that. We are working with the scientific community because that's the natural landing zone for how people will use this type of computing in order to get response and answers to the next modern day questions, right? So I believe, personally, that it's understanding those concepts and then being able to find the people that's delivering technology based on those concepts is an absolute great way to discover and then figure out where you want to go as an entry point and to get into this field and then to grow your career is all about being curious, trying new things, taking on the hard task, and then developing yourself accordingly.
Okay, so now let me push you a little. Okay,
Sure.
so basically, if you were to give your younger self an advice today of how to hack into IBM from the back door, what would you whisper yourself?
Okay, I'm trying to take myself off mute here. I would say learn how to take yourself off mute. And I say that in the literal sense, in that, being able to, speak up and advocate for yourself is so important in today's world. Not to just be overbearing, but it's also to say that, hey, how do you do things? What can I do to help? What areas of opportunity are existing out there that I can just lean into and thoroughly immerse myself in through education and books. And I love the fact that you have all these books behind you, Vishal. But that's where it starts, right? It's learning and experimenting and being willing to get your hands in the mix of the what's happening right now. And that's the thing I would say that kind of inhibited me at the onset was not really being willing to go out and explore things around me in order to figure out what the most challenging problems are, and then being able to learn about how to solve those challenges in a way and experimenting with those things because you have to put the time in. You got to put the work in. Nothing happens until you put the work in. So that's what I would tell my younger self is you got to put the work in. You got to be aware of what's going on around you. You got to lean into the challenging problems and you got to go out and figure out how to solve them in your way, and then let that land and see how you develop from there.
But that's not a hack. It's so you're saying just pay your dues and come.
It's the grit, right? It's the grit, it's the grind, it's the ability to see things that others don't see, you know. Is that a hack? Sort of, yeah.
So, so we are the last question. So last but not the least. So if you want something that our friends on this session take away from this conversation, what would that be? What would be your parting thought to our listeners and viewers?
Yeah, look, service is not just in uniform. Service is, can be done in a myriad of ways. And I'm sure, Vishal can attest to this is, find an opportunity within your local community to contribute and learn. Because when you're giving, you're also receiving on the other side of things in most cases. Give time to, teaching kids about, quantum computing. If you don't know yourself, get a book, learn about the concept and then figure out the next order thing about how to apply those concepts. That's what I would say to you all, my military colleagues is, and don't be afraid. I know that, there's probably some things in front of you that could be challenging, but don't be afraid to learn and explore new things. None of this stuff is made, in a vacuum. A lot of it requires collaboration. You can be a part of that as well. But you have to lean in, you have to roll up your sleeves, you have to do the hard jobs and work. You may have to spend a few extra hours at night on the weekends to do it. But that's not a foreign concept to those people that come from the military, you all. So just don't forget who you are and just go out, lean in and do something special.
With that, I think Cedric, thank you so much for your time. I'm couldn't believe how lucky IBM is to have you. So it's I think no wonder they're on to right track. So thank you for your service. Thank you for your service now in helping other colleagues understand and learn. So thank you and wish you nothing but luck in your success and your journey.
Absolutely.
And thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you're doing, and I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good one. Bye, guys. Awesome. So I think we are done with the session, guys. So the next session is in 45 minutes. And I think go back to your networking session, guys. And then you can network with others, peers, talk it out, chat, make friendships, bonds. There are a lot of service providers and employers. Have a conversation with them. Again, this is all about networking. It's very important element, and you should be doing it. And I'm glad you guys are doing it. I'll be hanging around here for a few more minutes. If you have any questions for me that I can answer, I'll be more than happy to. Else, I think thank you for your time, and I hope you found this conversation to be useful. I know the journey is hard, and you don't have to do everything alone. So it's important for you to have partners, peers, colleagues, mentors. I think just you have been hero all along, and sometime world ask a lot more from you. And I'm sure you never shy away. You had never been, you will never be. So thank you for your time, guys. Awesome.